Hello everyone, and welcome to our bi-weekly customer success webinar series. Today's session is entitled Site Recovery, VMware Site Recovery as a Service, DR as a Service, whatever you want to call it. It is essentially our site recovery SRM-based SaaS product, and we have our esteemed GS Khalsa here to help us with it today. My name is Matt Vandenbeld, and I'm a customer success architect on the VMware Cloud Customer Success team. And on behalf of the VMware team, I'd like to personally thank you for investing your time with us today. Before we start, I'd like to remind all guests that you're muted. Please post questions using QA feature at the bottom of the Zoom on Twitch, or you can tweet at me at vcloudmatt. And with that, I'm going to throw it right over to GS, and if you want to do a little bit of an intro of yourself and jump right in.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Welcome everybody. My name is GS Khalsa. I work in technical marketing and I cover all things availability for VMware, specifically in the storage and availability business unit. So I cover Site Recovery Manager, vSphere application, VMware Site Recovery, all that good stuff. Let's get started.
And don't be fooled, just because he's in tech marketing, he actually does know what he's talking about. I can personally vouch for that.
Yeah, thanks. I always, when I say tech marketing, I always say that we should really say it more like technical marketing. High on the technical, low on the marketing, but you can judge for yourselves based on this presentation. And yeah, please do throw any questions you have in the Q&A. I will try and keep an eye on that as we're going through and answer those questions either in line or definitely get to them at the end. I would much rather this be a little bit interactive than just me talking to my slides. Here's what we're going to cover. I'm going to make it kind of a little bit quick because I know that all of you are at least basically familiar with VMware Cloud on AWS. You might be new to the VMware Site Recovery may be something that's completely new to you, so that's where I want to spend most of the time. But we'll just do a quick overview of VMC and how VMware Site Recovery fits into that, talk about the architecture, different use cases and topologies that we support, deployment options, look at some details of replication, and then we'll talk about protection and recovery and then reporting. You're already familiar with VMware Cloud on AWS and how that fits into both the on-prem environment as well as into native AWS services. You've probably seen this before and you're hopefully familiar with the way that we're dealing with new features and that we're publicly sharing our roadmap. There's links on this page to that roadmap, to FAQ about it, and then just understanding a little bit about the way that we're classifying features. There are a couple of features that I'm going to be talking about that are currently in preview. Those may not be available yet, but they're more than likely going to be available to all customers soon. The big thing that started us down the road of VMware Site Recovery was the number of customers that we talked with that were dissatisfied with the current state of available DR solutions. There's a lot of things missing from and a lot of challenges with disaster recovery. And the things that we're talking about are just the risk of not having a DR solution. There's a huge number of customers out there that still don't have disaster recovery. The challenges of dealing with a DR site, that you have this secondary site that sits around, in a lot of cases, unused most of the time, and it has challenges and difficulties with maintaining it and operating it, getting it stood up, all of those things. And then just on an ongoing basis, the complexity of managing and maintaining a disaster recovery solution, and especially the secondary site part of that DR solution. And
And
so,
just to pipe in real quick, JS, 'cause
yeah,
you said you want interactive, so you be careful what you
please,
ask
yeah,
for. So I think one of the key things there, and I'm sure you'll probably cover it later on as well, is to me you don't have DR if you don't test DR. And that's one of the
very
really
true.
cool things about this offering. And I'm sure, like I said, you get into detail, but to me, there's a kind of that evolution of customers. There's the ones that don't have any DR,
Yep.
which is kind of probably 40%. Then there's like 55% that have a DR but haven't tested it, and then there's
Yep.
like 5% maybe that actually do test to validate it. And
Oh yeah.
in my mind, I think only that 5% really has a disaster recovery.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I would totally agree with that. To me, the we haven't gotten into specific features yet, but yeah, to me the best part of Site Recovery Manager and the VMware Site Recovery DR as a service solution, the best part of both of those is that ability to non-disruptively test your recovery plan. Because yeah, like you were saying, Matt, if you're not testing it, I would agree with that statement that if you're not testing it, you could argue that you don't really have DR, because if you don't know how it's going to work, or even if it's going to work, then what really do you have? And the challenge with so many disaster recovery solutions, or not even disaster recovery solutions, disaster recovery plans that a lot of businesses have, is when you only test your DR solution, maybe once a year, maybe every 6 months or something like that, because it's a disruptive process to do that. Um, the amount that most environments change between when you run that test and then the next time that you test it, you know, how much confidence do you really have that if you needed it to do what you wanted it to do, that it would actually do that?
Yeah, back in
Um,
my early days as an administrator, this is back when you had DR run books that were actually pieces of binders worth of
oh, and I
stuff.
think there's lots of businesses that still have those.
But on page one, I put a sticky note that said "sell stock" because the rest of this is probably not going to work.
Yeah,
So, and I know I'm kind of harping on it, but I can't emphasize enough how important that testing feature really is and how
yeah,
cool that is. So,
yeah, totally agree. Um, yeah, so in addition to that ability to non-disruptively test, the other things that VMware Site Recovery offers are things like a consistent environment. So you and your administrators are used to working in vCenter, and dealing with standard vSphere, and interacting with your VMs, in through vCenter, doing all the things you're normally used to doing. You don't want to have a DR solution where that's different. And as since you're familiar with VMware Cloud on AWS, you know that interacting with the environment is 99% the same from a regular administrative standpoint. You don't have to learn new tools in order to figure out how to interact with the environment. In the same token, there's no conversion process to run VMs within VMware Cloud and AWS. There's nothing, you don't have to change the format of your disks, or run your VMs through a P2V process or something like that to get them to run. Everything's just ready to go. Um, you have, we've been harping on the idea of that ability to non-disruptively test. The thing that you are non-disruptively testing is again one of those critical parts, which is that ability to automate and orchestrate the disaster recovery process, getting those VMs added to inventory, powering them on in the correct order, changing their IP addresses if that's what they need, running scripts on them if that's what needs to happen in order for those to get stood up. So all of those things, Site Recovery Manager will take care of, and again, will give you that ability to non-disruptively test. And then, all of this ties in, and again, you're familiar with VMware Cloud on AWS, but all of this ties in with the economics that you get from using a cloud-based solution. You're only going to pay for VMware Site Recovery for VMs that you replicate and protect. So, if you have a VM that for whatever reason no longer needs that protection, you stop replicating it, you stop paying for it.
Well, and I think just to touch upon that cost aspect is especially with the R5s coming on, and there's some more stuff on the roadmap we probably don't want to get into, but with doing this on VMware Cloud, you can run a very very small instance you pay for with varying degrees of storage behind it, and add hosts averaging 10 minutes afterwards. So if you have a DR event,
Yeah,
scale up. So you can pay for the minimum and then scale up if you need it.
exactly. Yeah, and I'm actually going to be publishing a video definitely in the next week, that highlights that, where we have a demo showing running an on-prem environment that is about 10 hosts running about 500 VMs, replicating into a VMware Cloud environment that is 3 hosts, but has, using that scaled storage model, the Elastic vSAN storage model that we're offering. And in the event of when the DR event kicks off, part of that DR event is calling an API that scales up that environment. And then once that environment even scales, then we have that Elastic DRaaS component that allows that environment to dynamically scale from there. So, reduce either reduce down if we've over provisioned, or add additional hosts if we need more capacity. So that elastic nature of cloud just gives you capabilities that they're really impossible anywhere else. There's no other environment where you could add a host to a cluster in 10 minutes, from not paying anything for it to it in your environment, providing compute, memory, and storage to your environment. You know, there's no way to do that anywhere else in 10 minutes. And really in most environments you're talking about weeks, not you know not minor increases over 10 minutes, but massive
You're calling your
increases over 10.
friends and seeing if they have anything laying around.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. So um, so all of those things come together in VMware Site Recovery. It's delivered as an add-on to your existing VMware Cloud on AWS environment. All you have to do, and I have some screenshots of it, I'll show it a little bit later, but all you have to do is just click activate, and in the background we take care of deploying Site Recovery Manager and vSphere application. All you have to do on-prem is deploy Site Recovery Manager and the vSphere application appliance. It's really easy to get both of those deployed in, I'm fairly well practiced at it, but I can do it in about 15 minutes. I would say the average user should be able to have it done in about an hour. And at that point, you're pretty much ready to start replicating and protecting VMs. So I like to say that, this solution provides, you can go from 0 to DR in about an hour. The other thing to talk about here, or just at least mention, is we've talked before about how this is built on existing VMware solutions in Site Recovery Manager and vSphere application, and really just to be clear, this is not like a custom version of those products or a one-off version of those. This is the standard core version of those products, as with all of the products that are part of VMware Cloud on AWS. This is the standard version of those products, just installed into the VMware Cloud on AWS environment. So all of the benefits that you're getting from the engineering work that's gone into these solutions is available within VMware Cloud on AWS. Site Recovery Manager is used by over 20,000 customers throughout the world. There's millions of VMs that are protected by Site Recovery Manager. Millions of VMs have been recovered with Site Recovery Manager. It's an established, mature, proven solution, and vSphere application is the same. It's been around for a very long time, gone through a number of versions, a lot of enhancements, and provides a really solid solution. So as I mentioned before, we provide that that non-disruptive testing capability. Obviously, we do a automated failover capability. So the ability to migrate VMs from one site to another um, in an automated fashion without beyond kicking off the recovery. There's no additional hand-holding or anything that you as the operator would have to do. The failover is just going to happen automatically in the background. Reprotection and failback is automated as well. So once you have moved your VMs from on-prem into VMware Cloud on AWS, it's just a one-button click uh, process to reverse that protection and reverse replication. So getting things running back in the opposite direction isn't complicated. It's really simple. There's no complexity to that at all. And then, as with any kind of a solution like this, we provide detailed reporting that allows you to make sure that you can meet whatever business, financial, regulatory, whatever requirements you have to report that out to whoever you need to just confirm that you're doing what you're supposed to and you're testing it the way that you're supposed to, and you have the capabilities that you're supposed to. So from a topology standpoint, we provide a couple of different interesting options. So we VMware Site Recovery, since it's built on Site Recovery Manager and vSphere application, it provides the capability to tie in with an environment that's already using Site Recovery Manager in other ways. So you could have a situation where you're protecting, you have your primary site and you're protecting running Site Recovery Manager to a single secondary site, and then you're also protecting other VMs from that primary site to VMware Cloud on AWS. So ability to have multiple and varied topology support to give you flexibility in how you want to lay out that environment. One of the newest things, and this is something that isn't currently in preview, is the ability to support fan-in within VMware Cloud on AWS. So the ability to have multiple remote sites all protected over to a single VMware Cloud on AWS software SDDC. So lots of different options when it comes to how that topology, how you lay out that topology and the flexibility, the options that you have there for how you have that working for you.
One interesting one topology that just kind of came to mind that wasn't really on there is because of the different AWS regions, you could actually do either a far region or a closer region, as opposed to kind of fanning in and fanning out. You can have, if you have a data center in LA and a data center in New York, you can have your DR to Oregon and Virginia, right? Which is something that's available with VMware Cloud. That, as opposed to building data centers everywhere, you could actually have around the world DR if you so desired.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's something that I was going to hit on. This is as good a place as any to talk about it. In addition to supporting kind of a in addition to supporting a typical model, where you have the customer site and VMware Cloud on AWS, and the kind of the traditional on-prem to VMware Cloud on AWS configuration. You can also have that, like you were talking about, have that configured um, from VMware Cloud on AWS to VMware Cloud on AWS and into different regions. Um, and one of the things that you're going to get there is you're going to get one of the you would get there is you have an entirely self-managed or VMware managed disaster recovery solution. So there's nothing in that environment that you as the customer would have to deal with. Everything would just be managed by VMware. We take care of operating and configuring and updating vSphere application and Site Recovery Manager at both ends of that. So provides kind of a cool model there. So I do see a question.
Yeah, so the question is, would this fan-in model work for MSPs with multi-tenancy?
And yeah, I don't see. I mean, the challenge with from a multi-tenancy standpoint, the challenge with Site Recovery Manager is that it's not. It depends on how you're doing that multi-tenancy. If you have it split out by where you're deploying a pair of SRM servers for each customer, that's a lot more workable than if you were trying to share SRM instances among multiple customers. So it would depend on how you're configuring that. But
Yeah,
it,
I think with the minimum size of 3 nodes now, and potentially getting smaller than that, I don't know if I'd recommend muddying those waters a little bit. Kind of, I think what you're getting at, it could get complex. Whereas it might be better, especially in the MSP model, to just have recovery as just SDDCs for each customer.
yeah, yeah, and but again, it would just depend.
Yeah,
There are MSPs that provide that capability to customers where they have a single vCenter that they kind of segment out, and then potentially they could have just eventually the plan is to support the same limit that we support on-prem, which is up to 10, 10 vCenters per SRM server. So potentially you could have 10 customers sharing a single vCenter and divvy up, uh, divvy up things according to that.
yeah, no, that's true. It depends on the use case, what your customers are looking for, what you're offering.
Yeah.
Maybe the question's a little bit too, what we kind of used to offer in the vCloud Air days, and it's not quite as multi-tenant as that, but you can get pretty close.
Yeah. Yeah, and just one note for people, if you can, if you have, if there's any more questions, if you can throw those in the Q&A panel, that just makes it a little bit easier than chat. But let's see. So the other thing, and I already talked about this a little bit before, but this is the idea of being able to right-size your DR environment, utilizing this new piece of hardware that we've worked on with Amazon that allows us to have the capacity that vSAN is providing with that host be dynamic instead of fixed. And what this means is that you could have a smaller compute and memory footprint within VMware Cloud on AWS and a larger storage component, so that you have kind of a pilot light for your failover. So you have just 3 hosts there running a minimal workload, and in the event of a disaster, you're able to fail over into that environment, and while that failover is running, start adding hosts into it and building it up into however big it needs to be in order to support your entire environment. And that way you're not having to pay for memory and compute that you would otherwise not be using. So
Because I know, and I just add some color on that. I think that when you talk about that complexity of DR. To me, that's usually the root of it. Is that, if you did this on prem, you got to buy all this hardware to account for all of your stuff, but you don't want to have it sitting there doing nothing. So then you come up with all these use
Exactly.
cases for, well, okay, maybe I'll put dev test there, but then now I got to make sure I turn that off, and it just gets really complex. And this really solves a lot of that
Yeah.
concern.
And that's not to say that you can't, and you couldn't even combine the two of those together. I mean, maybe if your test dev environment is kind of small and you could run that on the 3-host cluster, and then in the event of a disaster, you can have SRM orchestrate the power off of that, or just reduce, put it into a resource pool where um, as you recover those VMs, they get all of the resources, and your test dev environment doesn't get those resources. Um, but it definitely provides a lot of cool flexibility there, and capability to make that whole process a lot easier. Um, if any of you have familiarity with Site Recovery Manager, one of the things that you may be aware of and could potentially be concerned with is having the challenge that of versioning between instances of Site Recovery Manager. It used to be that it required the exact same version of vCenter at both sites, and therefore the same version of Site Recovery Manager and vSphere application. And so anytime you wanted to upgrade a vCenter, it triggered a whole chain of processes that made upgrades kind of hard to deal with. The way that this now works is the latest version of Site Recovery Manager, what we use for VMware Cloud on AWS, is we've decoupled it from vCenter. So now we support different versions of vCenter with SRM 8.1. You can run either vCenter 6.0 U3, vCenter 6.5, or 6.7. All of those 3 different versions will work
So
with.
we had just another question come in that you might be covering a little bit later. It's about how the service is sold and by the subscription. Or
Yeah,
are you going to cover that in a little bit? Or
I mean, we could hit that now. That's
okay,
fine. Yeah. So yeah, the way that the service is sold is it's done per protected VM, and it's billed, I believe it's per minute, just kind of the standard way that everything else is with VMware Cloud on AWS. But yeah, there's uh, an amount per VM per minute that is charged per protected VM. So, and I actually honestly don't know what that charge currently is, and I think it probably depends somewhat on, you know, I know there's different factors that go into that, so, but I don't know exactly what those are.
yeah, we're the tech guys. We're not the sales guys.
Exactly.
But you did get the point of yes. It's per VM as a service, right? So it's the new world.
Exactly. Um, so as far as connectivity goes, this is definitely a critical thing to think about. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about that. I'm guessing that if you already have, if you're already using VMware Cloud on AWS, you have some kind of connectivity, um, already established. The different things that we support, the different ways that you can handle that is, you can do direct connect, IPsec VPN. We do also support a layer 2 VPN, which gives you the capability of moving VMs in and out of VMware Cloud on AWS without having to customize the IP address for that. Um, let's see. The limits that we have for the solution, currently we support up to 1,000 protected VMs. We are working on increasing that. We initially only supported 500. We've increased that to 1,000 just recently, and again, we're working on upping that to 2,000 and supporting the same scale that we do on-prem.
And just to put this in context as well, this is per SDDC. So
Correct.
if you have to go over 1,000, you can have another SDDC to get bigger. So that's
Yeah.
a per unit maximum, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Thanks for that clarification. As far as use cases that we see for site recovery, obviously most people think of disaster recovery. That's a way to get that, really quick RTO recovery time. Gives you that ability to recover from an unexpected failure. You do have the ability to recover from either a full or partial site. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to fail over the entire site. If you have a problem with, a single host, a group of hosts, a rack, whatever that is, you have that ability to fail over. You can also use site recovery for disaster avoidance. So if you see some kind of an issue coming before it actually hits you, you have the ability to get out of the way of that and have site recovery orchestrate the migration of your VMs from one site to another. You would take downtime for doing that, but the downtime is going to be more than likely less than you would otherwise experience. And it will make sure that you don't experience any data loss, give you a graceful shutdown. So cool option there from a different way of utilizing it from a prevention standpoint. We do also support, and really, I would almost say, and I'd be curious what your take on this is, Matt. But the usually the way, or often the way that you'll see DR deployed is kind of in that active passive scenario where you have the DR site is sitting basically unused. And you're only going to use it in the event of a disaster. Now, with something like VMware Cloud on AWS, I would think that customers might want to take more of an advantage of that those resources and utilize them for something. And the cool thing with Site Recovery Manager combined with vCenter and vSphere is that it gives you some interesting ways of handling that and ways of being able to deal with it, and that you can do things like create resource pools where you have a resource pool within VMware Cloud on AWS for your lower tier workloads, that in the event of contention, it will deprive that resource pool of resources. But as long as there's not any contention, those VMs get as much resources as they want. And what that would mean or look like is that when you fail over into from your on-prem, or even when you run a test from on-prem to VMware Cloud on AWS, you would have that ability to, the environment would automatically adjust those resources to give the resources to your higher tier workloads, and only provide to the lower tier workloads whatever's left over, whatever's available, and make sure that the higher tier workloads get what they need. And then again, what's kind of incredible about and unique about the VMware Cloud on AWS environment is, if that's a temporary thing, and those test dev workloads, whatever they are deprived of resources for a day or two, while you're dealing with whatever smaller issue that you have to deal with before you fail back, that's fine. But if you have some kind of major issue at your on-prem site and you need to operate out of VMware Cloud on AWS for a longer period of time, it's really easy to add capacity into that environment as you need it, and then scale it down when you no longer need it. And again, that's something that you just can't get anywhere else. If you look at a standard DR site, if you size it small, if you size it so that it can just run your tier 1 and tier 2 workloads, it's going to take you weeks to increase that capacity to support those lower tier workloads. So that flexibility that you get there from the service is kind of incredible. Again, just talking a little bit more about the idea of elastic vSAN. getting into a little bit more of the details there. Again, this is currently in preview, but the idea would be is that all of the additional storage is provided by EBS, and specifically EBS GB2. The raw capacity tier can be anywhere from 15 to 35 terabytes, and it's adjustable in 5 terabyte increments. You would have compression enabled, and it just gives you that ability to easily adjust and right size your storage to whatever you need it to be.
So just to add a little clarification to this point as well, when you pick the size, you kind of pick the size. Currently, the way it works is if you pick 20 terabytes today, everything you kick out will be 20 terabytes. There's no way of actually scaling that up and down right now. It's something that's coming, but you can pick from 15 to 35 when you start, and then every host will come out with that exact amount of storage. We are also looking at offering, I believe it's up to 70 terabytes here in the near future. But just wanted people to know that you can't really set up a cluster with 15 terabytes and then change the capacity to 35 per host right now. So we did have another question. If you run failover on VMC on AWS for a period, then need to fail back to on-prem, are there egress fees associated when replicating back?
And I'll be honest, I'm actually not entirely sure what.
Well, I was trying to throw you under the bus to make you the bad guy, but yes. Yes, there will be egress fees for that. So there are a few things that we're currently looking at to try to mitigate those costs. But yes, when you were to replicate back, you would be paying the AWS egress fee, and that's something that's kind of completely out of our control, not to deflect, but that's just something that Amazon will always bill for all that egress traffic, and we're part and parcel to that. So, yes.
Yeah, and if I understand correctly, I think if you looked at doing something like the VMware Cloud, if you went from one VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC to another SDDC, even in a different region, within Amazon's environment, they don't necessarily charge an egress fee. I mean, I think there's some traffic fee, but it's different.
So between AZs is one fee, between regions is another fee, and out to the internet, for a better term, is another fee. So
yeah,
anytime you egress, there is a fee. There's just incremental amounts of fees.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and this is just an example of kind of what that what that elastic DRaaS flexibility could look like. Is losing that on-prem environment, and then not just scaling over as is, but scaling up that recovery site environment to support both all 4 tiers, everything that had previously been running at 2 sites, and being able to just handle that flexibly. It also supports bidirectional failover. So if you wanted to run production workloads both on-prem and within VMware Cloud on AWS and have those protected back and forth to each other, that's supported. That would work as well. No issues, complications with doing that. If you have looked at all or are familiar with stretch clusters that we offer within VMware Cloud on AWS, you can tie that in, utilize that with site recovery as well. Combine those to get just an even more enhanced level of availability. You could also do this going the opposite direction. You could have a stretch cluster on-prem, replicating to an VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. So
yeah, just to touch a little bit on this use case, because I think it's great, and this has actually come up with a lot of our customers recently. And I'm sure you deal with this all the time, GS, is that difference between availability and recoverability. So the box on the left here is the availability play. That's our stretch cluster, which will protect you from some stuff like an AZ failure, and your resources will automatically power on. But you really want to also have that recovery option either from a region failure or a human oops or
Exactly.
disaster avoidance or whatever. But so they're kind of different solutions. But if you really want the absolute best protection that's available, this is kind of how you would do it. Is you'd have that stretch multi AZ cluster with site recovery on top of it to back to your on-prem if you wanted to, or to another SDDC.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Having those different uh, tiers of availability is an awesome capability that just greatly enhances the flexibility and the availability of your resources. So
Because one of the things that comes up often to us is people think that stretched cluster gives them recoverability, which it doesn't. It
yeah,
kind of does, but it's availability, not recoverability. So
yeah, yeah, and it really is good to to be aware of that. And the other thing with the stretch cluster is it's kind of a particular use case. It's um, even within VMware Cloud and AWS, it's availability within a, a region. It's availability zones within a region. If you're deploying a stretch cluster on-prem, you're talking about usually within a metro area. It's no more than 60 miles, or really no more than 5 milliseconds of round trip latency, which works out to about 60 miles. And one of the things that a number of customers found out kind of the hard way about stretch clusters from a DR standpoint is that if you have a disaster that impacts a wider area, something like a hurricane, like Hurricane Sandy, hitting the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, a number of VMware customers had stretch clusters where both parts of that stretch cluster were impacted by Sandy, and they were put into a position where they you know had thought they had an availability solution, or they thought of what they had as a DR solution when it really wasn't. So
and you never want to be that guy that has to have that conversation with the higher ups after.
yeah,
I've been in that
definitely.
room. That's not.
Yeah,
Don't be there. Don't be that guy.
yeah. So looking at the deployment for VMware Site Recovery, there's really kind of 5 simple steps that you've got to work through. You're going to enable the site recovery service. You're going to configure the firewall. You're going to download and deploy vSphere application and Site Recovery Manager. Then you're going to pair your sites and map your resources, define your placeholder data stores, and then you're going to start replicating and protecting VMs. So let's just take a quick look at what those individual steps look like. So, from within your SDDC, you're just going to go to your add-ons. You click on Activate. It's going to take about 10 to 15 minutes. While that's running, you can start downloading those the components that you're going to need for on-prem, and you can even, depending on the speed of your connection, start downloading them, potentially finish downloading them and start installing them at that point. And then once it's done, it's just going to show your solution as active, and it provides you those links where you can go to manage your portals. Um, After you've got that done, you're going to need to create some firewall rules. These firewall rules are all documented, what you have to do. Depending on what your security requirements are, you can create more or less of these rules. You can make them kind of as specific or as general as makes sense for your environment. We provide guidance um, about how you would do that. But get those firewall rules defined. Um,
So we did have another question pop up, but
yeah,
just before that, back to the firewall stuff. So depending on what version of the SDDC you have, so with NSXV, which is one of our earlier ones, we moved to NSXT now, but with NSXV we actually had a rules accelerator, and it's something that we're working very hard to come into NSXT world, so that there will just be a drop down menu that says create firewall rules for site recovery, and you can click OK. So that's going to be coming soon on NSXT. exists now with NSXV uh,
Yeah.
to help with that. So the question was from Damon again: can you pre-seed with something like AWS Snowball?
That's something that we don't currently support, but again, that's another one of those things that's on our public roadmap and is something that we're working towards. So,
So stay tuned.
yeah. Um, so getting vSphere replication deployed is just a simple OVF template that run through the configuration of and deploy. Site Recovery Manager is just a standard Windows installation. Um, both of these are really just fill in a little bit of details and a lot of click, click, next. Again, you should be able to get both of those done in just a few minutes. And then once the on-prem components are done, we've activated the service, we've enabled the firewall. At that point, you're able to start pairing up your sites. Once they're paired, at that point, you're ready to map your resources. This is an idea that within VMware Site Recovery, where you are just letting Site Recovery know, okay, I have VMs that are in this particular folder, connected to this particular network, located in this particular resource pool, associated with a particular storage policy. When we move it over to a different vCenter, when we move it into VMware Cloud on AWS, we just need to let Site Recovery know where you want those VMs placed. So, this folder maps to this folder, this network maps to this network, this resource pool maps to this resource pool. Those are usually fairly simple to set up. It just depends on how complex your environment is. We do provide some capability there for automating that. So if you have the same name of resources, so if you have a group of folders that are called the same thing that your on-prem folders are called, we can do some matching there. So you don't have to go through and manually map those out. You can let Site Recovery do some of that mapping for you. Once you're done with that, the last thing that you have to do is just start replicating and protecting VMs. And if you're familiar with VMware Site Recovery, with Site Recovery Manager, you might be aware that in the past that the replication process and the protection process were two kind of separate things. And that's something that we've actually merged together in the latest version of Site Recovery, is we've made that process a lot easier by combining the replication configuration with protection. So once you go through, you select a group of VMs or a single VM, configure it for replication, then we give you the option of either adding it to a new protection group, adding it to an existing protection group, or if for some reason you don't want to add it to a protection group yet, you can do that as well. But and then if you add it to an existing protection group, and that protection group is already part of a recovery plan, then it will be all, that VM is going to be completely protected. If you create a new protection group, then the next thing that you'd have is the option to create a recovery plan for that and add that protection group to it. So what that deployment looks like is you get the SRM server, you get your SRM server, your vSphere application servers deployed, get your resources mapped, sites paired, get your protection groups configured. A protection group is just a group of VMs that you're going to be recovering together. And then you add those protection groups to recovery plans. And at that point, you're ready to start running workflows and testing or actually recovering your VMs. So just really quick talking about vSphere application. vSphere application is per VM level replication. So the idea is that we're only replicating, we're monitoring as VMs write to their disks, and we're keeping track of those changes that those VMs are making to their disks and only replicating those changes. and we're doing it per VM, so there's no dependency on the underlying storage. The underlying storage can be anything, and obviously we're speaking on-prem because within VMware Cloud and AWS we're using vSAN, but on-prem you can be using vSAN, local storage, NFS, block, vVols, whatever storage you're using. If it's supported by vSphere, it's supported on with vSphere application. The one exception to that is if you're using physical RDMs or shared disks. That's one thing that we can't handle with vSphere application, but there's some interesting ways that you can handle workloads that have that dependency. If that's something for you, you can throw something in the Q&A and we can talk about that. vSphere application, since it's done on a per VM basis, it can protect any VM. Doesn't matter what the operating system is, what applications are running on that VM. There's no dependencies to the replication engine for that, since we're not dealing with the VM at the OS level. You can set different RPOs for different VMs. So we support RPOs as low as 5 minutes and as high as 24 hours, just depending on what you need. vSphere application supports end-to-end network compression, and it also supports, if you need it, Windows VSS as well as Linux file system quiescing. So if you have applications that require that in order to continue operating successfully, that's something that is supported as well. So when we talk about, we talked a little bit about protection groups. A protection group is just a group of VMs that are going to get recovered together, and usually those are organized by application, but it just depends on what your requirements are. Each VM is only going to belong to a single protection group. However, a protection group can belong to one or more recovery plans. And what that does is it just gives you some flexibility in terms of how you lay out your protection groups. And what I mean by that is, let me just skip ahead here, is you could have 3 different protection groups, and then you could have 3 or 4 different recovery plans where, for our web app as an example, we have one recovery plan that's just the web application, but then we have another recovery plan that's our entire site. That's all 3 of our protection groups. And so now we have the flexibility of either testing or failing over either the web app by itself or the entire site. And again, protection groups can belong to one or more recovery plans, so you have a lot of flexibility there in how you lay that out. And recovery plans are where you would define or where you would run your workflows. And I don't think we're going to have enough time to get into all of the different things that we can do with recovery plans in this session. But just really quick, the thing that I wanted to highlight is the different things that we can do as far as workflows go. We talked a little bit about these, but what I'm talking about with workflows are running a non-disruptive test, running a failover, running a failback, running a reprotect, those kind of things. So
yeah, so to me that workflow was that entire binder we used to have.
Yes, exactly.
In an automated fashion.
Exactly.
That is quite intuitive. I don't know if you have a screenshot of it, but there's basically a list, an ordered list of actions that you can go completely down. Wait for this VM to power on before that VM powers on, or
so we're gonna we synchronize the synchronize the replication data. We're gonna power off the VMs in the reverse order of your desired power on, and we're going to synchronize the storage again, just getting any replication that occurred, any changes that occurred while those VMs were shutting off. Do some prep of the recovery site VMs, get them added into inventory. We can actually power off non-critical VMs at the recovery site if that's something that you need as part of your recovery. Then we can customize those IP addresses for VMs, and then we power them on in the order that you desire, so to make sure that your applications operate the way that you need them to.
And one of the things that I wanted to touch on too here is because it used to be a massive pain for me, and people probably caught up to this in the product, but when you customize IP addresses, you can actually put ranges in there as opposed to by each VM, right? You can put like everything that's 10 dot is now 20 dot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can combine the from an IP standpoint, um, you can combine we call it IP subnet mapping. So you can create a map, as part of the network mapping. You can actually create a subnet map as well, so that in addition to changing a VM's network from this network at site A to this network at site B, you can change it from one subnet at site A to a different subnet at site B, and that way you don't have to define individual IP customizations by VMs. You're able to just do it for an entire subnet. And it just simplifies that whole process.
Yeah, did like what I got. So did you have more slides you want to cover, or did you want to see if there's any more questions in the chat? If
Yeah,
anybody has questions.
I mean there are more slides to cover, but I want to be respectful of people's time, and if there's more questions, we can always we could do another session at some point in the future. I can um, I don't know, we can figure out things from there, but
Yeah, no. Well, with the nature of the cloud world we live in and the subscription-based service, I'm sure we can have a recap on this at least probably quarterly with all the new features and functionalities and stuff that. And I guess it's something that'd be good to touch upon real quick here too. Is that with the subscription-based service, there's always features and functionality going in. It's not like you're waiting for SRM 8.5 or whatever have you. It's kind of this constant progression that features are coming really quick, really fast, and will continue that way in the future.
yeah, exactly.
It's kind of a little bit outside perhaps the regular release cycle that we kind of had for a lot of our on-prem products. It's when we see the need, and this is something that you as the customers can drive with us, is I really need this feature or function. We could put in, and we could put in a little bit quicker into the SaaS based model than the traditional models that we deliver on prem.
Yep.
So I don't see any questions, and we started a little bit late. So if there's a couple of slides you really wanted to cover, we can probably go for another 2-3 minutes if you have some stuff.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the thing that I would just really quick want to go through is just talk about how, I talked about how SRM has the ability to uh, recover your VMs in the way that you need them to be. And so, what I mean by that is that we support two ideas. We can organize VMs into priority groups, and all of the VMs within a priority group would get started before we move on to the next priority group. And just to be clear, with site recovery, the thing that we're going to do um, is, we're not just going to power on the VM and then move on to the next one. We're actually going to power it on and then wait for VM tools heartbeats to respond for that VM and then move on to the next one. So it's not just a quick power on all the VMs in that order. We're going to make sure that those VMs are actually running before we move on to the next thing. So in this situation, we'd power on that master database. VM tools heartbeats start responding. We then move on to priority group 2. We power on the next database and exchange server. Um, VM tools heartbeats on both of those respond. We move on to priority group 3. Within a priority group, if you need more granularity, you can define dependencies. So you could say, app server 2 is dependent on app server 1. And so now within priority group 3, we'll power on first app server 1, VM tools heartbeats respond. Then we power on app server 2, VM tools heartbeats respond, and then we move on to priority group 3, 4, and priority group 5. So, just an example there of how we make sure that you get those dependencies built in, and just a screenshot of what that looks like of defining those dependencies, as well as organizing the priority groups. And again, this idea, the following VMs are going to get started before this VM, creating those dependencies. We talked about IP customization. So you can define your IP customization per VM if that's what you need to do. If you can, though, it's a lot simpler to create subnet maps. So you say, from this network at my on-prem environment, DPG VM network 1284, connected to, mapped to SDDC CGW network 1, any VM that's on that one network is going to get mapped to the other network, and then you can associate a subnet with that as well. So if, the subnet on-prem is 10.10.10.0, within your SDDC, say it's 192.168.100.0. Now what'll happen is anytime that you have a VM that's connected to that network, say it's, has the IP address of 10.10.10.5, when you fail it over to VMware Cloud on AWS, it's automatically going to get changed to 192.168.100.5. And there's no individual configuration that you have to do for that. Just the fact that you associated it with that mapping is going to take care of getting its IP address mapped. So kind of a cool option there and a way to make that process really simple. We also support the ability to run post power on scripts. So those scripts are going to be able to be run from VMs. You can have multiple scripts that run on a VM after that VM powers on. And the recovery plan is going to continue either after the script succeeds or if you have some kind of a timeout. And you can define what that timeout is. You also have options for shutting down and starting up your VMs. So if you have VMs that you don't want to be powered on when they're recovered, or if for some reason they're not using VMware tools, you can't use VMware tools. You can have it not wait for VMware tools or not powered on. So just a lot of flexibility there. And then the thing that I wanted to talk about from a testing standpoint is just speak really quickly to how we are able to make those tests be non-disruptive. So from a storage standpoint, the thing that we do is we just take a snapshot of that replicated storage at the recovery site. So at VMware, in VMware Cloud on AWS, you have that replication ongoing. We take a snapshot of that of the target data, and we use that to run that test. And that way, you're getting the most current copy of that data without it being disruptive to replication or to your production systems. So there's no impact to your RPO, no impact to replication. All of that stays the same, and you're still able to get an accurate and complete test of that. From a networking standpoint, the thing that we do is we take care, we give you the ability to create an isolated test network. And we actually have a couple of different ways that you can do that. You can have us auto-create a test network, in which case that's kind of going to be isolated to individual hosts, or you can actually work to create a complete test network that duplicates your production network and would give you an ability to non-disruptively test your applications as well as the failover. And last but not least, the one thing that I just want to touch on just really quickly is from a reporting standpoint. We've got a lot of detail that when it comes to reporting, every workflow that you run, we provide the result of that, when it was done, how long it took, who ran it, and then each one of those, we provide that high level detail, but then for each individual workflow, we provide a really detailed report that shows every individual step that was run, how long each step took, what the result of each of those steps were. So, a lot higher level of detail. And yeah, that kind of concludes my presentation. So.
Well, I really appreciate that. Just before everybody takes off, I'm going to launch a poll here. If you guys could respond to the poll before I leave. If there's any last questions, we can hang out for a minute here while I'm kind of going through my usual ending spiel. Again, GS would really like to thank you for your time. A little bit of overtime as well. I think this is a really cool solution. You can hit up GS on Twitter. Do you want to put your Twitter handle out there
Yeah, sure.
for everybody? Or you can tweet at me at vcloudmatt. We also have an email address for these webinars at cloudcs@vmware.com. GS put it into the chat there. Next week we're going to be doing an office hours. We're going to be back at 8 a.m. PST for the Americas/EMEA time frame. We're going to have a partner on in a couple other weeks, and we're always again looking for any kind of suggestions, any topics anybody wants to have covered, or just even just talked about, or questions answered. Absolutely tweet at me, email it at cloudcs at vmware.com. This recording is going to go up onto YouTube for anybody that wants to maybe go back afterwards and catch up on something or see a bit maybe they had missed. And again, I can't thank everybody much for their time, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers.